I had been struggling to deal with the arid dryness of the air for some time. The humans, it seemed, liked to keep the general humidity just a little below what most semi-aquatic species considered tolerable. My gills were suffering far more than I was willing to make noticeable, lest it show me at a disadvantage. It rather reminded me of how this all happened in the first place and how powerless I was to stop it. I was, after all, bargaining for my life here. So I told them everything, absolutely everything. Gods help me, but what choice did I have? The speaker stood to her full regal height, her carapace shimmering in violet and blue hue as the lighting of the room washed from behind her, amplifying her presence. General Avarice, if you would be so kind as to make your case regarding your concerns. The voice from the speaker echoed across the communication network with a buzzing thrum, the insectoid nature of the speaker's native tongue being notable in spite of the universal translator. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, it would be a pleasure. I attempted to sound confident in spite of, well, everything really. I brushed down my robes of nobility. The weight of the medals on my breast clattered slightly as I reached to pick up my datapad, taking my time and attempting to even now put my report into something that would allow me to make a certain amount of sense beyond the basic facts and figures that would allow for some actual understanding of just how royally the Koth had screwed us all over. Gentle beings of the United Council, as I'm sure you are aware by now, due to a recent conflict on the outermost edges of what is now considered human-occupied space, that humanity managed to capture some significant technologies, including but not limited to, yes, General, we are aware of the human salvage particle weapons and somewhat more advanced FTL drives, shielding, etc. The speaker snipped coldly. War salvage is the very least of our concerns, and I was assured that this would not simply be yet another case of arguing that the humans should be stripped of this technology by the assembled council due to their relatively youthful nature as a species. A murmur of general annoyance sparked from a myriad of communication organs, each attempting to be acknowledged by the comm system. I adjusted myself again and took a quick facial spritz in order to keep myself moistened, my prior anxiety regarding a show of weakness to this assembled council evaporating almost as quickly as my own bodily fluids in this desert-like heat. Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm aware of that, but please be aware that we are not here to speak on behalf of the Koth remnant, but rather on behalf of all of the unaligned species. The general murmur of frustration seemed to calm somewhat. The very idea of a single representative for such a large body of previously unaffiliated planets was not something to be ignored, and I had taken this into account. I just hoped it would be enough. Humans have always been adaptive, some would say remarkably so. This may have had something to do with evolving on what many considered to be a world most unsuited to the growth and development of a sapient species. In fact, to many it was little more than a world designed for conflict, war, and most importantly, imminent and unexpected death. The roughly 8-unit tall great apes were by most standards as one would expect from a high-gravity world species. They were relatively stocky, highly muscled, and completely omnivorous. Understandable considering how difficult it must have been to have developed agriculture to a degree significant enough to feed a population. Yet the humans somehow made it work. They were near the galactic edge, far from almost every other species with limited resources and effectively trapped in their home system by a combination of a massive asteroid belt and daily battery from their sun in the form of radiation far beyond normal, and a planet that seemed to alter its poles as and when it pleased. Yet the humans somehow made do. They are, or rather were, considered little more than another relatively limited species, trapped in a star system that almost seemed designed to break them. Humans had apparently decided at some stage that this simply wasn't acceptable, and just got on with existing, in spite of literally every possible odd being stacked against them. When the Koth stumbled across them, seeing the scattered infighting human governments that held together these primitives, they must have believed their every festival and spawning day had come at once. The first to fall was a mining station near the human system borders. It had been effectively unarmed by comparison to the Koth scout ship, and was swatted away as if it were little more than a fly. As were the communications relay that the little station seemed to have been built around. It had managed only one short burst of data before it fell to the scout ship's weapons. SOS. The Koth failed to understand a few things. Firstly, that this mining station was apparently a civilian construct, or so they thought. The second was that there was a reason why the humans had built such a massive relay into the small station. The third and fourth were something they would learn very quickly. "This is Prime Investigator Neville of the Koth dynasty. Power down your weapons and surrender yourselves immediately, or face us in open." This was the only transmitted signal from the scout ship before its total, or rather what we believed to be its total destruction. After all, total destruction was the only thing one would expect when targeted by over 24 nuclear warheads attached to primitive, barely functional short-range FTL drives that they had developed for in-system travel, directed by 2 inhabited planets and several dozen inhabited moons that had decided that fighting with each other could be put to rest when suddenly invaded by an external threat. The first lesson was that humans do not like to be disturbed while they are engaged in their species' collective favorite pastime of killing each other in unique and terrifying ways. The second is they are not keen on being threatened, especially if it comes at the costs of civilian lives. As you can see, Madam Speaker, the humans have been spreading at an exceptionally accelerated rate since that conflict. I coughed, the dryness in my throat forcing my hand to allow me to take a sip from my water vessel before I continued. My anxiety was met with a general sigh or species-equivalent gesture. Nonetheless, I attempted to continue as best I could, but before I could speak, "General, again, we are more than aware that the spoils of conflict can often lead to a species being uplifted through simple reverse engineering." The speaker chittered in clear frustration, her mandibles clicking noisily with each clearly aggravated word. "If you are going to continue with this, there had best be a point, as all you are doing now is being remarkably rude considering that we had connived to welcome humanity to our unified trade union." "Yes, Speaker, I have a point. I swear on my hatchlings' lives. It is of vital importance that this be said prior to the humans' arrival," I stammered as the speaker shook her head and waved so that I could continue. The SS Valiant had been the first to make it to the wreckage, an Earth ship with a crew of little more than 50 Earthborn humans. The second, a heavily modified cargo hauler that had been weaponized by the Mars and Titan-affiliated nations, each spacers of multiple years. For the first time in over a century, each were running with its weapon ports closed. This may well have been the first step toward a lasting peace and unified humanity. All it had taken was a shared enemy, and the Koth would pay for it in blood. The war, if you can even call it that, lasted only 6 short months by human standard, and had resulted in almost every Koth vessel from scout to warship being utterly destroyed in a combination of nuclear fire and adapted weaponry. They had even opted to avoid civilian shipping lanes and cargo ships, something the Koth Admiralty had quickly taken advantage of. The cost in civilian lives quickly led to rebellion, spurred on by seemingly random weapon drops supplied by the humans into pockets of unrest, and soon after surrender from the newly appointed civil leadership. With the military government usurped, humanity had access to the sum total knowledge of the Koth and put it to use almost immediately. It is the unified opinion of the unaffiliated worlds that humanity are readying a fleet in order to bring further worlds under their control, and with Koth technology at their disposal, we have no way of stopping such a species from doing just that, I implored. But I was met with little more than blank, bored, and dismissive stares from each of the Council's representatives. I was dismissed soon after. The United Earth Fleet carrier, SS Europa, arrived less than 3 standard hours later. Its captain, a stocky human even by human standards, marched through the airlock as Everest was making their way to their own ship. By the human's side stood a Ka'ath warrior, dressed in a similar, but less well-decorated human-style uniform, carrying a number of data tablets, seeming still briefing the human officer, even laughing when the meaty Death Worlder pointed out that I appeared to resemble a creature from its world, a thing called an axolotl. My gills still quiver at the insult. It took almost 3 standard rotations to get from the conference back to my homeworld of Lox, and presented my total failure to the representatives of the unaffiliated worlds via comms. It was agreed there would have to be an end put to the human expansion regardless of the costs. Little did I know. How could I? I only found out when the rebels forced their way into my habitat armed with human weaponry. The humans, it seems, don't play fair. The humans are insidious. Now, as I sit awaiting my inevitable execution at the hands of my own people, the humans have arrived to set up a forward operating base and offer support to the rebellion they instigated, all the while claiming they are here for peacekeeping and have now sent a negotiator to bargain for my life and the lives of my brood. Humans apparently have rules, even for such an underhanded and duplicitous method of conflict. Because humans have a system, they call it freedom, and they intend to free the known galaxy whether we want it or not.